I woke up one morning and realized I didn't know the man sleeping beside me. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, a life we built from nothing, all of it, based on a name that wasn't his. The mob called asking for Thomas Marchetti, and my husband's face went white as death. That's when I knew the man I loved didn't exist. He was a ghost, running from a past he'd buried so deep even I couldn't find it. They say you never really know someone, but I didn't even know his name. And now his past has found us, and everything I thought was real is about to shatter. Are you ready for the truth? The August heat in Charleston wrapped around everything like a wet blanket, thick and suffocating. Margaret Ellen Crawford stood at her kitchen window, watching the Spanish moss sway lazily from the live oak in their backyard. 20 years in this house, 20 years of breakfasts at this same counter, of coffee brewing in the same pot, of her husband David kissing her forehead before heading to his accounting firm downtown. 20 years of what she thought was truth. The ceiling fan rotated slowly above her head, barely disturbing the humid air that seemed to settle into the very walls of their historic Harleston Village home. At 48 years old, Margaret had built what everyone called a picture-perfect life. 2 children, Nima, now 19 and starting her sophomore year at College of Charleston, and Michael, 17 and preparing for his senior year at Portugal School. A husband who never missed a soccer game, never forgot an anniversary, never raised his voice in anger. David Crawford, 50 years old, graying at the temples in that distinguished way that made him look like he belonged in the pages of a catalog selling expensive watches. He'd built his accounting practice from nothing, or so the story went. Started with 3 clients in a tiny office on King Street 20 years ago, right after they'd moved to Charleston from what he called up north. Now, Crawford and Associates occupied an entire floor of a renovated building on Broad Street. Margaret picked up her coffee mug, the one Emma had made in a pottery class years ago. Slightly lopsided, but Precious Ann took a sip. The chicory coffee tasted bitter on her tongue this morning. Everything felt slightly off, like a picture frame hanging just a degree crooked. You couldn't quite put your finger on it, but something wasn't right. It had started 3 weeks ago with a phone call. She'd answered their landline yes. They still had one. David insisted on Itan, heard only breathing on the other end. Then a man's voice, rough and unfamiliar. Tell Thomas Marchetti his past is calling. The line went dead. Margaret had stood there, receiver in hand, trying to make sense of it. Wrong number, obviously. They didn't know anyone named Thomas Marchetti. She'd mentioned it to David that evening, laughing about how odd it was. The color had drained from his face so quickly, she thought he might faint. He'd recovered fast, too fast, laughing it off as one of those scam calls. But Margaret had seen something in his eyes in that split second before he'd composed himself. Fear, pure, primal fear. Since then, she'd noticed other things. David checking the locks twice, sometimes 3 times before bed. The way he'd flinch when a car backfired on the street. How he'd started carrying his phone everywhere, even to the bathroom, when he'd never been attached to it before. And yesterday, she'd seen him standing at their bedroom window at 2 a.m, just staring out at the empty street, his shoulders tense. Mom. Emma's voice broke through her thoughts. Her daughter appeared in the doorway, still in her sleep shorts and College of Charleston's t-shirt, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. You okay? You've been staring at that tree for like 10 minutes? Margaret forced a smile. Just thinking about your grandmother's recipe for she crab soup? Thought I might make it for your father tonight. Dad's favorite? Emma grabbed a glass from the cabinet, filling it with water from the filtered pitcher. Is he okay? He seemed weird at dinner last night, so it wasn't just Margaret's imagination. Weird. How? Emma shrugged, but her intelligent brown eyes so, much like Margaret's own, held concern. I don't know, distracted. Like he was somewhere else. Michael noticed too. Before Margaret could respond, she heard David's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for work in his standard uniform of pressed khakis and a button-down shirt. This one, pale blue. He'd shaved carefully, and he smelled of the same cologne he'd worn for 20 years. Everything normal, everything routine, except for the tightness around his eyes. Morning, ladies. He kissed Emma's cheek, then moved to Margaret, his lips brushing her temple. The same gesture, every morning, for 2 decades. Sleep well, like a rock, Emma said, scrolling through her phone. Unlike you, apparently, I heard you get up in the middle of the night. David's hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. Just needed some water. Getting old, I guess. Everything starts breaking down after 50. He was lying. Margaret knew the cadence of her husband's voice, the way a musician knows their instrument. That slight uptick at the end of the sentence, the way his left hand had moved to adjust his watch at tell he had when he was nervous. I'll be home late tonight, David said, pouring his coffee into his travel mug. Meeting with the Hendersons about their estate planning. You know how chatty Bill gets after 5 o'clock. Another lie? Margaret felt it in her gut. The Hendersons were snowbirds, currently in their other home in Vermont. She knew because Susan Henderson had called last week to cancel their lunch date, apologizing that she wouldn't be back in Charleston until October. Okay, Margaret said evenly, watching him over the rim of her mug. "I'll keep dinner warm." David nodded, already moving toward the door that led to their garage. "Love you both." "Love you too, Dad," Emma called after him. The door closed. The garage door rumbled open, then shut. The familiar sound of his Lexus starting, backing out, driving away. Margaret set down her coffee mug with more force than necessary. "Mom?" Emma looked up from her phone, worry creasing her young face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart." Margaret smiled, but she could feel it didn't reach her eyes. Nothing at all. But that was a lie too, because in that moment, standing in her sun-filled kitchen in the home they'd built together, Margaret Ellen Crawford made a decision. She was going to find out who her husband really was, even if the truth destroyed everything she thought she knew. The Spanish moss outside the window swayed in a breeze she couldn't feel, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to toll. Wednesday morning in Charleston, another beautiful day in paradise. Another day of living a lie. The Charleston County Public Library smelled of old paper and air conditioning, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat outside. Margaret sat at a computer terminal in the corner, her hands trembling slightly as she typed Thomas Marchetti into the search bar. She'd never been a suspicious wife, never checked David's phone or rifled through his pockets. Trust had been the foundation of their marriage, or what she'd believed was trust. Now that foundation felt like sand, shifting beneath her feet with every breath. The search results loaded slowly, and Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. The first few hits were social media profiles, none matching anyone she knew. Then, halfway down the page, a news article from the Philadelphia Inquirer, dated March 2004. Key witness in organized crime trial missing, presumed dead or in protective custody. Margaret's hand froze on the mouse. Philadelphia. David had told her he was from Connecticut, said his parents had passed away before they met, that he was an only child with no family to speak of. A clean slate, he'd called it. A fresh start. She clicked the link, her eyes scanning the article rapidly. Thomas Marchetti, age 28, former accountant for the Rossini crime family, had agreed to testify against his employers after witnessing a murder. He was scheduled to appear in court when he vanished from protective custody. Authorities believed he'd either been killed or successfully placed in the witness security program. Margaret scrolled down to the photograph accompanying the article. Her breath caught in her throat. The man in the photo was younger, his hair darker, his face less weathered by time. But those were David's eyes. The same distinctive green-gold color, the same slight downturn at the outer corners. The same small scar above the left eyebrow that David had told her came from a childhood bicycle accident. Thomas Marchetti was David Crawford. Her husband of 20 years was a man who'd testified against the mob. The library suddenly felt too small, too hot, despite the air conditioning. Margaret's vision blurred at the edges. She gripped the edge of the desk, forcing herself to breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way she'd taught Emma during her panic attacks in middle school, "Ma'am, you all right?" The librarian, a young woman with kind eyes and purple-streaked hair, approached with concern. "Fine," Margaret managed. "Just a bit overheated. I'll be fine." She printed the article, her hands shaking as she fed quarters into the machine. Then she searched for more. Article after article appeared, painting a picture of a man she'd never known. Thomas Marchetti, brilliant with numbers, had worked for the Rossini family for 5 years before his conscience got the better of him. He'd witnessed the execution-style murder of a federal informant and decided he couldn't be complicit anymore. His testimony had brought down 17 members of the organization, including the patriarch, Vincent Rossini. The trial had been called the biggest blow to organized crime in Philadelphia in 2 decades. And then Thomas Marchetti had vanished into thin air. Margaret gathered the printed articles, shoving them into her purse with trembling hands. She needed to get home, needed to think. But first, she needed to talk to someone who couldn't lie to her. 40 minutes later, Margaret sat across from her best friend Janine at a small cafe on East Bay Street. Janine Roberts had been her closest confidant since they'd met at a junior league meeting 15 years ago. A divorce attorney with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, Janine had seen every kind of marital deception imaginable. "I think my husband has been lying to me about who he is," Margaret said without preamble. Sliding the printed articles across the small wrought iron table, Janine's perfectly manicured eyebrows rose as she read. When she looked up, her dark eyes were serious. "Maggie, this is... Christ, this is huge. You're sure this is David? Look at the photo. Really, look." Janine studied the grainy newsprint image, then back at Margaret. It could be him 20 years ago. The eyes are similar. But Maggie, witness protection? That's federal. That's serious business. "Tell me what to do." Margaret's voice cracked. "I've been married to this man for 20 years. We have 2 children together. I've built my entire adult life with him, and I don't even know his real name." Janine reached across the table, squeezing Margaret's hand. "First, you breathe. Second, you don't confront him yet. If this is true, if he's really in witness protection, There's a reason for the secrecy. Those people don't disappear unless their lives are in genuine danger. But he lied to me, Janine, every day for 20 years. Or he protected you. Janine's voice was gentle, but firm. If the mob thinks you know where he is, you become a target too. So do Emma and Michael. The thought sent ice water through Margaret's veins. Her children. God, what had David brought into their lives? You need to find out for certain before you do anything, Janine continued. Do you have access to his papers? Birth certificate? Social security card? Anything from before you met? Margaret thought back. He keeps important documents in a safe in his office? At home? Not at work. I know the combination hour wedding date. Then tonight, when he's supposedly meeting with the Hendersons who are actually in Vermont, you look. You find proof. Then we figure out what to do. Margaret nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. What else had David lied about? Their entire relationship had started with deception. He'd approached her at a church social in Charleston. New to the city, he'd said. Looking to plant roots. He'd been charming, attentive, respectful. She'd fallen hard and fast, swept up in his quiet intensity. Had any of it been real? Or was she just convenient cover for a man on the run? There's something else, Margaret said quietly. 3 weeks ago, someone called our house. Asked for Thomas Marchetti. David turned white as a sheet. Janine's expression darkened. That's not good. If someone's looking for him, if they found him after all this time, she didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what it meant. Margaret left the cafe an hour later, her head spinning. Charleston passed by in a blur of historic homes and tourist-crowded streets. This city she loved suddenly felt foreign, as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. Everything she'd thought solid was turning to quicksand. At home, she went through the motions of daily life. Folded laundry, checked Michael's summer reading assignment, responded to emails from the women's auxiliary at church. All while the printed articles burned like coals in her purse. At 6 o'clock, Michael came home from football practice, sunburned and exhausted. At 6:30, Emma returned from her summer job at a boutique on King Street. They ate dinner together, the three of them, David's chair conspicuously empty. Is Dad really working late? Michael asked, his 17-year-old face showing skepticism beyond his years. He's been doing that a lot lately. Yes, sweetheart. Estate planning for the Hendersons, the lie tasted like ash in her mouth. When had she become someone who lied to her children? At 8 o'clock, after Michael had retreated to his room to play video games and Emma had curled up on the couch with her laptop, Margaret climbed the stairs to David's home office. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her chest. The safe was behind a painting of the Battery. One of their first purchases as a couple. She swung it aside, her fingers trembling as she entered the combination. May 14th, 2006. Their wedding date. The lock clicked open. Inside, she found folders neatly labeled. Tax returns, insurance policies, mortgage documents. All in the name of David Robert Crawford, social security number and all. At the bottom, a manila envelope unsealed. Margaret pulled it out, her hands shaking. Inside were documents she'd never seen before. A birth certificate for David Robert Crawford, born in Hartford, Connecticut, 1975. But the paper looked too new, too crisp. And there, in the corner, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it, a watermark she recognized from her years doing administrative work. The kind of official-looking fake documents you could get if you had the right connections. Beneath it, a letter, old, worn at the folds, as if it had been read many times. She opened it carefully. Thomas, this is your new identity. Memorize everything, destroy nothing. Your life depends on your ability to become this person completely. The family you left behind believes you're dead. Let them keep believing that. It's safer for everyone. Remember, David Crawford has no past, no history, no baggage. He's a blank slate. Make sure it stays that way. Any contact with your previous life puts you and anyone close to you in immediate danger. The Rossini family has a long memory and unlimited resources. They will kill you if they find you. They will kill anyone who helps you. Live quietly. Stay invisible. And for God's sake, don't trust anyone with the truth. Deputy Marshal J. Franklin Margaret sank to the floor, the letter cluttering from her hands. Everything was true, all of it. Her husband was a ghost, a manufactured person built on lies and fear, and she had been living with him, sleeping beside him, raising children with him, for 20 years without knowing who he really was. From downstairs, she heard Emma laugh at something on her laptop. Michael's door opened, and he called down asking if there was any ice cream left. Normal sounds, normal life. A life built on a foundation of lies. Margaret gathered the documents carefully, placing them back exactly as she'd found them. She closed the safe, hung the painting, and walked down the stairs on legs that felt like water. In her bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed she shared with a stranger, and finally let herself cry. Silent, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest. 20 years, God, 20 years of loving someone who didn't exist. At 10 o'clock, she heard the garage door open. David's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie, looking exactly like he had every night for 2 decades. "Sorry I'm late," he said, offering a tired smile. "Bill Henderson talks more than any man I've ever met." Margaret looked at him wryly, looked at him and saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. "How was the meeting?" "Long, productive. You know how estate planning goes? Everyone wants to make sure their grandchildren are taken care of. More lies, smooth as silk. He'd had 20 years to perfect them." "David," she said slowly, "is there anything you want to tell me?" For just a moment, fear flashed across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by mild confusion. "About what?" "About anything." "About us, about your life before we met. Maggie, we've been married 20 years. You know everything about me." He crossed to her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. The same gesture, every night. What's brought this on? She could tell him now. Confront him with what she knew. Demand the truth. But Janine's words echoed in her head. "If the mob thinks you know where he is, you become a target too." "Nothing," Margaret said, the word tasting like poison. "Just one of those days where you wonder if you really know anyone." David studied her face, and for a moment, she thought he might confess everything. Instead, he smiled. "You know me, Maggie, better than anyone in the world." Another lie. Maybe the biggest one of all. As he disappeared into the bathroom to shower, Margaret lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, church bells tolled 10 times. Outside, the humid Charleston night pressed against the windows. And in her chest, something vital and essential began to crack. Because how do you confront a lie when the truth might get you killed? Margaret didn't sleep that night. She lay rigid beside David, listening to his even breathing, wondering if any of it had been real. Had he ever loved her, or was she just convenient camouflage? A prop in his desperate attempt to disappear. At 5 in the morning, unable to stand the torture of her thoughts any longer, she slipped out of bed and went downstairs. The kitchen was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps filtering through the wavy glass of their old windows. She made coffee, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot like her life slowly draining away. She'd made a decision sometime around 3 a.m., in that dark hour when everything seems both impossibly clear and utterly hopeless. She was going to confront him. Today, she couldn't live another day in this house of lies. Couldn't kiss him goodbye and pretend everything was normal. Couldn't look at her children and know she was complicit in this deception. But first, she needed answers from someone who couldn't lie. At 7 o'clock, she called the number she'd found buried in her research yesterday. It had taken some digging, but eventually she'd found a contact. Retired Deputy U.S. Marshal James Franklin, now living in Savannah. The same J. Franklin who'd signed the letter in David's safe. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah, Marshal Franklin. My name is Margaret Crawford. I need to talk to you about Thomas Marchetti." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Then, I don't know anyone by that name." "Please," Margaret's voice cracked. "I'm his wife. I've been his wife for 20 years, and I just found out his real name. Someone called her house 3 weeks ago asking for Thomas. If there's danger, I need to know. I have children, please." Another long silence. Then, heavily, "Jesus Christ, he told you." "He didn't tell me anything. I found out on my own." "How much do you know?" "Enough. The Rossini family. The murder he witnessed. The trial. Witness protection." Franklin exhaled loudly. "Mrs. Crawford, what I'm about to tell you needs to stay between us. If word gets out that I'm talking to you, both our lives could be in danger. Understand?" Margaret's hand tightened on the phone. "I understand. Thomas Marchetti was one of the bravest witnesses I ever protected. Most people in his situation cut a deal. Testify, then violate every rule we give them. Try to contact their families. Can't let go of their old lives. Thomas understood the stakes. He completely disappeared. Became someone new. I honestly thought he'd make it the rest of his life without anyone finding him. But someone has found him. If someone called your house using his real name, yes. That's very bad, Mrs. Crawford. The Rossini family, what's left of it, they never forget. Vincent died in prison 5 years ago, but his son Marco took over the operation. Marco was 15 when Thomas testified. He watched his father get life in prison because of that testimony. Margaret felt sick. How old is Marco now? Mid-30s, young, ambitious, angry. He's been rebuilding the family's operations. And he's got something to prove to show he's as ruthless as his old man. Finding the man who destroyed his father would be a hell of a trophy. What do I do? You get your family out of that house today. Right now. You call this number, he rattled off digits that Margaret frantically scribbled on a notepad, and you tell them Franklin sent you. They'll know what to do. But Mrs. Crawford, you need to move fast. If they know where he is, they're already planning. What about my children? They don't know anything about this. That won't matter to Marco Rossini. Anyone connected to Thomas Marchetti is a loose end. And the Rossini family doesn't leave loose ends. The line went dead. Margaret stood frozen in her kitchen, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the dial tone. Around her, the house began to wake up, pipes creaking as Michael showered, Emma's alarm going off upstairs, David's footsteps crossing their bedroom. Normal sounds, normal morning, but nothing would ever be normal again. She had to tell him she knew. Had to tell him about the phone call to Franklin. Had to. Mom. Margaret spun around. Emma stood in the doorway, her expression worried. I heard you on the phone. You sounded upset. What's wrong? Nothing, sweetheart. Just an early call from the insurance company. You know how they are. The lie came so easily now. When had she become someone who lied as naturally as breathing? You're a terrible liar, Mom. Emma crossed to her, and Margaret saw intelligence and concern warring in her daughter's face. Something's been wrong for days. You and Dad? You're both acting weird. Are you guys okay? The marriage? Oh honey. Margaret pulled her daughter into a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. How do you tell your 19-year-old daughter that everything she's ever known about her father is a lie? That his entire identity is fabricated? That dangerous men might be coming for all of them. We're fine, Margaret lied. Your father's just been stressed with work. You're lying. Emma pulled back, her brown eyes, so much like Margaret's own, filled with tears. I'm not a kid anymore, Mom. I can tell when something's wrong. Just, please, whatever it is, you can tell me. Before Margaret could respond, David appeared in the doorway. Good morning, ladies. You're both up early. Margaret looked at her husband, her stranger husband, and something in her expression made him freeze. She saw the moment recognition dawned in his eyes, the moment he understood that she knew. Emma, honey, go wake your brother, Margaret said quietly. We need to have a family meeting. But now, please. Emma looked between her parents, then nodded slowly and left. The silence that followed was suffocating. David stood perfectly still, his face draining of color. How long have you known? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Does it matter? Maggie, I can explain, can you? Margaret's voice was sharp as broken glass. Can you explain 20 years of lies? Can you explain building our entire life together on a foundation of deception? Can you explain letting me love someone who doesn't exist? I do exist. David took a step toward her. Everything we've built together, everything we have, that's real. That's always been real. Your name isn't even David. Margaret's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. I don't know who you are. I've been married to you for 20 years and I don't know your real name, where you're really from, if you even love me or if I'm just convenient cover. Stop. David's voice cracked. Don't ever think that. Please, Maggie. I've made mistakes. I've lied about a lot of things, but not that. Never that. How can I believe anything you say? Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks. I found the documents. I read Marshall Franklin's letter. I know about Thomas Marchetti. I know about the Rossini family. I know about the murder you witnessed, the trial, all of it. David's legs seemed to give out. He sank into a kitchen chair, his head in his hands. Oh God, Maggie, what have you done? If you've been searching, if you've made calls, they could trace it. They already found you. Margaret slammed her coffee mug down on the counter. 3 weeks ago, someone called asking for Thomas Marchetti. Remember? The call I told you about. Your past is here, David, or Thomas, or whoever the hell you are. And I need to know everything, right now. Because Marshall Franklin said we need to leave today, and I won't run blindly. Not anymore. David looked up at her, and the devastation in his eyes almost broke her resolve. Almost. How much did Franklin tell you? Enough. The Rossini family, Marco taking over, the danger we're all in now? Then you know we need to go. Pack bags for you and the kids. Essential documents only. We can be gone in an hour. No. Margaret's voice was steel. Not until you tell me the truth. All of it. Why you lied. Why you built this life with me if I was just part of your cover. Why you had children if you knew this might happen someday. Because I fell in love with you. David stood abruptly, his voice raw with emotion. I was supposed to stay alone. Franklin warned me, over and over. Don't get attached. Don't build a real life. But then I met you at that church social, and you were so kind, so genuine, and I thought maybe I could have something real. Maybe I could stop being a ghost. So you used me. No, David crossed to her, his hands shaking. I loved you. I love you. Every moment of our marriage has been real for me. Yes, I lied about who I was before, but everything after the day we met that's been true. The love, the life we built, our children. That's all real. Your children don't even know your real name. Margaret's voice broke. How do I tell Emma and Michael that their father is someone else? That everything they've been told about their family history is a lie? You don't tell them anything. We pack, we leave. And maybe we can outrun this. Outrun it? Margaret laughed bitterly. For how long? Another 20 years? Do we move again? Change identities again? Start over in another city with another set of lies? If that's what it takes to keep you all safe, yes. Mom, Dad. Michael's voice came from the doorway. He stood there in his football practice shorts, his hair still messy from sleep, confusion and fear written across his young face. Emma stood behind him, her arms crossed protectively. What's going on? Michael asked. Emma said, you're having some kind of family meeting. Margaret looked at her children, her beautiful, innocent children who'd been lied to their entire lives, and felt something inside her shatter. They deserved the truth. But the truth might get them killed. David spoke before she could. Kids, we need to talk. Why don't we all sit down? I don't want to sit down, Emma said, her voice sharp. I want to know why Mom's crying and why you both look like the world's ending. Because it is, Margaret said quietly. Or at least, the world we thought we knew is ending. She watched David's face as he struggled with the decision, tell them everything or maintain the lie, protect them with ignorance or arm them with truth. Finally, he spoke. My name isn't David Crawford. It's Thomas Marchetti. And 22 years ago, I witnessed a murder and testified against one of the most dangerous crime families on the East Coast. The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret watched her children process the information, saw the exact moment comprehension dawned, followed immediately by disbelief, hurt, and fear. This is a joke, Michael said, but his voice wavered. Dad, this is some kind of weird joke, right? I wish it was, son. So who are you? Emma's voice was small, childlike. If you're not Dad, then who are you? I'm still your father. That's the one thing that's completely real. You, your brother, your mother, you're my family. That's never been a lie, but everything else has been. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Our grandparents who supposedly died before we were born, the stories about your childhood, the photo albums, all manufactured. David's voice was hollow. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, why are we talking about this now? Michael demanded, his 17-year-old mind cutting through to the practical. Why today? Margaret and David exchanged glances. Finally, Margaret answered. Because someone found us. Someone from your father's past. And we might not be safe here anymore. Not safe. Emma's voice rose. What does that mean? Are we in danger? Yes, David said simply. If the Rossini family found me, they'll want revenge. And they won't care that you're innocent. They'll use you to get to me. Michael sank into a chair, his face pale. Emma started crying, silent tears streaming down her face. Margaret wanted to comfort them, but she felt frozen, trapped in this nightmare her stranger husband had created. What do we do? Michael finally asked. We run, David said. We pack essentials and we leave now, today, and go where? Emma demanded another city, another fake name, another lie. If that's what it takes to keep you alive, yes. Margaret watched her family fracture in real time. Her daughter crying, her son angry and scared, her husband, the man she'd thought was her husband, looking like he might collapse under the weight of his own deceptions. And somewhere out there, dangerous men were hunting them. Outside the window, the Charleston morning was beautiful. The sun sparkled on the harbor. Tourists would be lining up for carriage rides. The scent of jasmine would be heavy in the air. Normal life continuing while theirs fell apart. We're not running, Margaret heard herself say. Everyone turned to look at her. We're not running, she repeated, her voice growing stronger. I won't uproot our children, leave everything we've built because of decisions you made before I even knew you existed. We're staying and we're finding another way. Maggie, that's not realistic. Don't. Margaret held up her hand. Don't tell me what's realistic. You've lied to me for 20 years. You don't get to make decisions for this family anymore. Not alone. The words hung in the air like smoke. David stared at her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not fear for his own safety, but genuine terror at the thought of losing her. Good. Let him be afraid. Let him understand what he'd done. So, what do we do? Emma asked, her voice small. Margaret looked at her daughter, then her son, then the man she'd called husband for 2 decades. First, we survive. Then, we decide if we can forgive. The church bells began to toll outside. 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning, the beginning of the end of everything they'd known. Or maybe, Margaret thought, the beginning of something real. The next 48 hours passed in a surreal blur. David insisted they couldn't stay in the house, so they checked into a hotel near the airport neutral territory. He called it easier to run from if needed. Margaret hadn't argued, mainly because she couldn't bear to sleep in their bedroom anymore. In the bed where she'd slept beside a stranger for 20 years, Emma and Michael took one room. Margaret and David took another, though she'd made him sleep on the couch. The kids had barely spoken since the revelation, their faces shell-shocked, their entire worldview shattered in a single morning. Now, Margaret sat in a booth at an all-night diner on Rivers Avenue, across from Marshall Franklin. She'd insisted on this meeting, despite David's protests. She needed answers from someone who couldn't spin lies as easily as breathing. Franklin was in his early 70s, with silver haircut, military short, and eyes that had seen too much. He'd driven up from Savannah as soon as she'd called, his voice grave when he'd agreed to meet. "I should have never placed him in Charleston," Franklin said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Should have sent him somewhere west, somewhere he couldn't plant roots so easily." But he was adamant, said he needed to be near the water, needed some semblance of home. "Philadelphia is near water," Margaret said. His grandmother had family in Charleston, distant cousins who'd moved south in the 50s. He'd visited once as a boy, before his parents died. Said it felt like a place where he could breathe. Margaret absorbed this another piece of her husband's real history. His parents died. Car accident when he was 12, raised by his grandmother in South Philly. She died while he was in college. Franklin looked at her with something like sympathy. "He didn't lie about being an orphan, Mrs. Crawford. He just rearranged the timeline. That's supposed to make me feel better." "No, but I thought you should know that not everything was fabricated. The core of who he is, that's real." Thomas Marchetti was a good kid who made a bad choice working for the wrong people. When he saw what they really were, he had the courage to walk away. That takes character. Character. Margaret laughed bitterly. "He built his character on my ignorance. Our children's ignorance." Franklin set down his coffee cup. "Mrs. Crawford, in my 35 years with the Marshal Service, I supervised the protection of over 200 witnesses. Most of them were criminals themselves. Mob associates, drug dealers, corrupt officials. Thomas was different. He was just an accountant who ended up in the wrong office building. Tell me what happened. The real story, not whatever sanitized version is in the public records." Franklin sighed heavily. Thomas graduated summa cum laude from Temple University with a degree in accounting. Smart as hell with numbers. The Rossini family recruited him right out of school. They had connections at the university, targeted promising candidates. He thought it was legitimate work at first. By the time he realized what they really were, he was in too deep. Or so he says. "Mrs. Crawford, I vetted every aspect of his story. Thomas wasn't involved in anything illegal. He kept their books, managed their legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction companies, waste management, the clean stuff. He didn't know about the murders, the extortion, the drugs. Not at first." "When did he find out?" Franklin's expression darkened. "March 12, 2004. He was working late at their main office, a supposed construction company in Port Richmond. Vincent Rossini called a meeting in the back room. Thomas was in the hallway, about to leave, when he heard shouting. Then a gunshot. Margaret felt cold despite the diner's warmth. He didn't mean to see it," Franklin continued. "He dropped his briefcase, and the noise made them aware someone was there. Vincent's enforcer, a man named Carmine DeLuca, came out and found Thomas standing there. The smart thing would have been to pretend he hadn't seen anything. But Thomas was 28 years old, scared out of his mind, and he ran. They chased him. For 2 blocks, Thomas managed to get to a police station. He was so terrified he confessed everything right there, told them who he worked for, what he'd seen, everything. The FBI was called within an hour, and he agreed to testify. Not at first. He knew what it meant going against the Rossini family was suicide. But then the FBI showed him photos of the man who'd been killed. Federal informant, 34 years old, father of 3. Killed because he'd been about to expose a major drug operation. Thomas saw those photos and understood he'd been complicit, even unknowingly, in something evil. Margaret processed this, trying to reconcile the terrified young man from Franklin's story with the composed, careful husband she'd known. So he testified. Spent 6 months in protective custody before the trial. The evidence he provided was devastating years of financial records showing money laundering, payoffs to corrupt officials, connections to murders the FBI had never been able to prove. Vincent Rossini got life without parole. 17 other family members got significant sentences. The whole organization was dismantled. And then Thomas Marchetti disappeared. We gave him a new identity, new social security number, new background. Taught him how to be David Crawford. Relocated him to Charleston with enough money to start over. And I told him, explicitly, multiple times, no relationships, no attachments, no life that could be traced back to who he really was. But he didn't listen. Franklin smiled sadly. He was human, Mrs. Crawford, and he was lonely. WITSEC participants, they often struggle with that. They lose their entire lives, family, friends, history. They become ghosts. Most can't handle it. They violate the rules, try to contact their old lives, and that's when they get killed. Did Thomas have anyone before he became David, a girlfriend? College sweetheart named Rachel. She thought he died in the witness protection process. We told her he'd been killed before we could relocate him. It destroyed her, from what I heard, but it kept her safe. Margaret felt a stab of something sympathy. Shared grief. He never tried to contact her, not once. Whatever his flaws, Thomas understood the stakes. He knew that any connection to his past put people in danger, so he became David Crawford completely, until he met you. Why didn't you stop him? When you found out he'd gotten married? I didn't know until 5 years after your wedding. By then, you had a daughter. What was I supposed to do? Pull him out, leave you with questions. You'd have gone looking for answers, put yourself in danger. So I made a judgment call, let it be. Hope that enough time had passed, that the Rossini family had moved on. But they didn't. Marco Rossini has been searching for Thomas for years. Vincent's last words to his son, right before he died in prison, were "Find the rat who put me here." It became Marco's mission. His way of honoring his father's memory. How did he find us? Franklin's expression grew troubled. We don't know for certain, but 3 months ago, there was a security breach at the Marshal Service. Some personnel files were stolen in a cyberdock. If Thomas's WITSEC file was among them, then they know everything. Where he is, who he became, his family. Yes, Margaret felt like the ground was dissolving beneath her. What do we do? Standard protocol is to relocate again. New identities, new city, but Mrs. Crawford, you have to understand this would be the second relocation. It's much harder. Your children are older, established. They'd have to leave college, friends, their entire lives. And even then, there's no guarantee. If Marco found him once, he can find him again. So, what are you saying? Franklin met her eyes directly. I'm saying there may not be a good solution. Sometimes, in this life, there are only bad options and worse options. Margaret sat back in the booth, exhaustion washing over her. 20 years, I gave him 20 years of my life, bore his children, built a home with him. And now you're telling me it might all have been for nothing? Not for nothing. Franklin's voice was gentle. I've seen a lot of WITSEC participants, Mrs. Crawford. Most of them are empty shells. Going through the motions of living, but not really alive. Thomas David, he became real again because of you. You gave him a reason to be human, not just a ghost. That's not enough. I know, but it's something. They sat in silence for a moment, the clatter of dishes and conversation around them. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. What happens if we don't run? Margaret finally asked. If we stay, face this head on. Franklin's expression was grim. The Rossini family doesn't forgive, and they don't forget. If you stay, they'll come for him, and they won't be subtle about it. Would they really hurt me, the children? To send a message? To make him suffer before they kill him? Yes, in a heartbeat. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling tears. She refused to shed burning behind her eyelids. This isn't fair. None of this is fair. No, Franklin agreed. It's not. Your husband made a choice 22 years ago to do the right thing, and you're paying the price for his courage. Courage? The word tasted bitter. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? Selfishness? He testified, yes. He helped put criminals away. But then he dragged me into his mess without my knowledge or consent. He had children who might now pay for his choices. That's not courage. She struggled for the word. That's cowardice hidden behind righteousness. Franklin didn't argue. Maybe, but what's done is done. The question now is what happens next. Margaret opened her eyes, looking at the marshal who'd helped create the lie she'd lived for 20 years. I need you to tell me something honestly. Can we survive this? Is there any scenario where my family comes out of this intact? Franklin was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he said, there might be one option, but it's risky, and David would have to agree to it. What option? Marco Rossini wants revenge? Yes, but he's also a businessman now, head of the family. He's rebuilt their operations, made them more sophisticated, less violent. He doesn't need the attention that comes with a high-profile hit. So maybe we can offer him something he wants more than revenge. Maybe we can negotiate. Margaret stared at him. Negotiate with the mob. It's not unheard of. If we can find out what Marco really wants, what would satisfy his need for justice without bloodshed? That's insane. Maybe, but it's an option. And right now, you don't have many of those. Margaret left the diner an hour later, her head spinning. She drove back to the hotel through Charleston's nighttime streets, past the historic district where tourists wandered happily, past the Battery where couples strolled hand in hand. Normal life continuing while hers fell apart. At the hotel, she found David awake, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. Did Franklin tell you everything? He asked. Enough. Margaret sat across from him, maintaining distance. He told me about Rachel. David flinched. Maggie, did you love her? Yes, I did. More than me. No. David's voice was firm. It was different. We were kids. Really? What I feel for you. What we've built together, it's deeper. More real. Real. Margaret laughed without humor. Everything about us is based on a lie, and you're talking about what's real. The love is real. The life we've built is real. Yes, I lied about who I was before. But everything after I met you, every moment, every choice that's been genuine. How can I believe that? Because I had nothing to gain by loving you except more danger, more risk, more ways to get hurt. Franklin told me over and over, stay alone. Don't get attached. But I couldn't because you made me feel human again. You gave me a reason to be more than just David Crawford, the fake identity. You gave me a reason to live. Margaret felt tears welling up despite her efforts to stay strong. You should have told me. Before we got married, before we had children, you should have given me a choice. I know. And I'm sorry, God. Maggie, I'm so sorry. But if I could go back, even knowing everything that's happened, I'd still choose you. I'd still choose this life. Because these 20 years with you have been the realest thing I've ever known. They sat in silence, the weight of 2 decades pressing down on them. Finally, Margaret spoke. Franklin said there might be a way to negotiate with Marco Rossini to end this without running. David's head snapped up. Absolutely not. We are not putting you anywhere near the Rossini family. It might be our only option. Then we run. We disappear again. I don't care if we have to change countries, change continents. I won't risk you negotiating with that family. It's not just your decision anymore. Margaret's voice was steel. You don't get to dictate what happens to this family, not after everything you've hidden. I'm trying to protect you. By making all the choices. By keeping me ignorant. That's not protection, David. That's control. He recoiled as if she'd slapped him. Is that what you think? That I've been controlling you? Haven't you? Every major decision about our lives has been based on information only you had. Where we live, how we live, what we tell our children about their family history. You've controlled the narrative this whole time, because the truth would have put you in danger. And now we're in danger anyway. So what was the point? What did 20 years of lies actually protect? David stood abruptly, pacing the small hotel room like a caged animal. I was trying to give you a normal life. I was trying to give our children a normal life. Is that so wrong? It is when it's built on deception. Margaret stood too, facing him. I deserved to know who I was marrying. Emma and Michael deserved to know who their father really was. We deserved the truth. And if I had told you the truth on our first date, hi, I'm Thomas Marchetti. I'm in witness protection because I testified against the mob, and anyone who gets close to me might end up dead. Would you have given me a chance? The question hung between them, unanswerable because they both knew the truth. No, she wouldn't have. She'd have walked away, found someone else, lived a completely different life. That's what I thought, David said quietly, reading her silence. So yes, I lied. Because I was selfish. Because I wanted you. Because for the first time since I became David Crawford, I wanted to be more than just a ghost playing a role. Margaret sank back onto the chair, suddenly exhausted. I don't know how to forgive this. I don't know if I can. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I'm just asking you to let me protect you. Let me fix this. How are you going to fix 20 years of lies? I don't know, David admitted, his voice breaking. But I have to try. Because losing you, losing our children, that would destroy me more completely than anything Marco Rossini could do. They stared at each other across the space of the hotel room, and Margaret saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not David Crawford, not Thomas Marchetti, but the man caught between those identities-flawed, frightened, desperate to protect the family he'd built from the wreckage of his past. Franklin's right, Margaret said finally. We need to try negotiating with Marco, because I won't spend the rest of my life running, and I won't let my children pay for your choices. Maggie, that's my condition. We try Franklin's way first. If it doesn't work, then we'll talk about running. But I need to know we exhausted every option before we uproot our children's lives again. David looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Finally, he nodded. Okay, we try Franklin's way. But if things go wrong, if there's any sign of danger, we're gone. Deal, deal. Outside the hotel window, dawn was breaking over Charleston. Another day beginning, another chance to either save or lose everything. Margaret watched the sunrise. Thinking about 20 years of mornings, she'd woken up beside a man whose real name she hadn't known. Love or lies? Truth or safety? Justice or mercy? The choices ahead seemed impossible. But for the first time in days, Margaret felt something other than betrayal and fear. She felt determination. They would face this together. She would demand the truth, all of it, and then she would decide if the man she'd loved for 20 years was worth fighting for. Even if the fight might destroy them all. The meeting was arranged for Neutral Ground Public Park near the Ashley River, chosen specifically because Marco Rossini wouldn't risk a scene in front of witnesses. Franklin had made contact through an intermediary, a lawyer who occasionally represented Rossini family interests in what they called diplomatic matters. Margaret insisted on being present. David had fought her on this for hours, but she'd been immovable. This was her life too, her children's lives. She had a right to face the man who threatened them. Now, she sat on a park bench beside David, watching joggers pass by and children play on the swings. Everything surreally normal while they waited to negotiate with a mob boss. Franklin stood nearby, tense and watchful. "He's late," David muttered, checking his watch for the third time. "He's making us wait," Franklin corrected. Standard intimidation tactic. Margaret's hands were clenched in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. She'd dressed carefully that morning, a simple navy dress. Her grandmother's pearls, her wedding ring still on her finger despite everything. Armor, in a way. A reminder of who she was. "There," Franklin said quietly. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Two men got out, first bodyguards, clearly scanning the area with professional paranoia. Then Marco Rossini himself emerged. He was younger than Margaret had expected, maybe 35, with dark hair slicked back and a suit that probably cost more than their monthly mortgage. Handsome in a dangerous way, with his father's eyes cold, calculating, missing nothing. He walked toward them with casual confidence, his bodyguards flanking him at a discreet distance. When he reached their bench, he studied David for a long moment. "Thomas Marchetti," he said finally, his voice carrying a slight accent. "I've been looking for you for a very long time." "Marco." David's voice was steady, but Margaret could feel the tension radiating from him. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet. Did I have a choice? When the legendary Marshall Franklin requests a sit-down, I listen." Marco's gaze shifted to Margaret. "And you must be the wife. 20 years of marriage, I'm told. You have my sympathy, Mrs. Crawford. Finding out the man you married is someone else entirely, that's a special kind of betrayal." "I don't need your sympathy," Margaret said coolly. "I need you to tell me what you want so we can end this." Marco's eyebrows rose. "Direct. I like that. Most people who meet with me are terrified. You're angry instead. I'm a mother protecting her children. That trumps fear. Interesting." Marco sat down on the bench across from them, crossing his legs casually. "You know what your husband took from me, Mrs. Crawford? He took my father. I was 15 years old when Vincent Rossini went to prison because of Thomas's testimony. 15? Do you know what it's like watching your father get a life sentence? Do you know what it's like finding out your husband testified against the mob?" Margaret shot back. "We've all lost things because of the choices other people made." Marco studied her with something that might have been respect. "Fair point. So, let's talk about what happens next." "We're here to negotiate," Franklin interjected. "Mrs. Crawford and her children are innocent parties. Thomas did what he had to do 22 years ago, but his family shouldn't pay for that, shouldn't they?" Marco leaned back. "In my world, family is everything. When someone betrays the family, everyone connected to them suffers. It's how we maintain order." "Your father killed an innocent man," David said quietly. "A federal informant with 3 children. I watched him execute that man in cold blood. My father did what he had to do to protect the family business. Your family business was built on violence, extortion, and drugs. I kept the books. I know exactly what the Rossini family did." Marco's expression hardened. "You self-righteous prick. You worked for us for 5 years. 5 years you took our money, enjoyed the benefits, never questioned where it came from. Then one day you grow a conscience and destroy everything my father built. I testified because it was the right thing to do. The right thing." Marco laughed bitterly. "The right thing destroyed my family. My mother drank herself to death waiting for my father to come home from prison. My sister married a lawyer trying to escape the family name. I spent my 20s rebuilding what you tore down. So don't talk to me about the right thing." Margaret watched the exchange, seeing decades of pain and anger on both sides. Two men who'd had their lives irrevocably altered by a single night, a single choice. "What do you want?" she asked Marco directly. "Revenge. To kill my husband. To hurt my children. What would actually satisfy you?" Marco turned to her, and for a moment, she saw past the cold mob boss exterior to something more human underneath. "You want the truth, Mrs. Crawford? I don't know. I've spent 15 years planning this moment, imagining what I'd do when I finally found Thomas Marchetti. And now that I'm here, I realize revenge won't bring my father back. It won't undo what happened. It won't make any of this right." "Then why did you find him?" Franklin asked. "Why go to all the trouble?" "Because it's what my father wanted. His dying wish. And in my world, you honor your father's wishes." Marco rubbed his face tiredly. "But I'm also trying to run a legitimate business now. The old ways, the violence, the territory wars there, bad for business. Law enforcement scrutiny, federal investigations, RICO charges. I've been working to move the family into legitimate enterprises." "So what does that mean for us?" Margaret asked. "It means I'm at a crossroads. I can honor my father by killing Thomas Marchetti and sending a message that betrayal has consequences. Or I can prove I'm better than my father by choosing a different path. What different path? David asked. Marco was quiet for a long moment, staring at the river. My father died believing he was right, believing the only way to maintain power was through fear. But maybe he was wrong. Maybe there's a way to honor his memory without becoming him. What are you suggesting? Franklin leaned forward. I'm suggesting that killing Thomas Marchetti won't change anything. His testimony is already part of the record. My father's already dead. Revenge is empty calories. It feels good in the moment, but leaves you hungry. Marco looked directly at David. But if you were to do something for me, something that helps instead of hurts, maybe we could call it even. What kind of something? Margaret asked suspiciously. I'm trying to go legitimate. Real estate, restaurants, waste management, legal now. But I can't escape my family's reputation. Banks won't loan to me. Investors won't touch me. I'm trying to build something real, and I'm being punished for my father's crimes. That's not my problem, David said. No, but it could be your solution. Marco pulled out a business card, handing it to David. You're an accountant. A good one. From what I understand, help me legitimize my business. Audit our books, clean up anything questionable, help me present a case to investors that were genuine. Be a consultant, nothing illegal, just help me build something my father never could. David stared at the card like it was a snake. You want me to work for you, not for me. With me. On legitimate business, think about IT2 help me go legit, and I let your family live in peace. No revenge, no threats, no looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. This is insane, David said. Is it? Marco challenged. Or is it justice? You took my father's illegitimate empire away. Help me build a legitimate one to replace it. Seems fair to me. Margaret looked at her husband, seeing the conflict in his eyes. Then she surprised herself by saying, We'll need guarantees. In writing, that you'll never threaten our family again, that this business relationship has a clear end date, and that our children are completely off limits forever. Marco looked at her with clear respect. You're tougher than your husband, Mrs. Crawford. I like that. Yes, we can put it in writing. Hell, we can make it a legally binding contract. I just want a chance to prove the Rossini name can mean something other than crime. Give us 24 hours, Margaret said. We need to discuss this as a family. Fair enough. Marco stood, straightening his jacket. But Mrs. Crawford, understand this offer is a one-time thing. If you refuse, I go back to my original plan. Honor my father's memory the traditional way. Are we clear, Crystal? Margaret said. Marco nodded to his bodyguards, then turned back one last time. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you were dragged into this. You didn't choose your husband's past, but you're choosing his future. Make sure it's the right choice. He walked away, disappearing into the SUV. It pulled out of the parking lot, leaving them sitting in stunned silence. That was, Franklin started, then stopped, apparently unable to find words. Unexpected, Margaret finished. He's serious, David said, staring at the business card. He actually wants to go legitimate. And he wants your help doing it, Franklin added. I've never seen anything like this in 35 years of witness protection. Margaret looked at her husband. What do you think? I think it's dangerous. Working with the Rossini family, even on legitimate business, puts us in their orbit again, creates a connection that could be exploited. But it also ends the threat, Margaret countered. If we refuse, we run forever. If we accept, we buy peace. For ourselves and our children. Can we trust him? David asked Franklin. The marshal considered this carefully. Marco Rossini has been remarkably restrained since taking over the family. He's settled territorial disputes through negotiation instead of violence. He's invested heavily in legitimate business ventures. By mob standards, he's practically a Boy Scout, but that doesn't mean he won't revert to old ways if crossed. So it's a calculated risk, Margaret said. Everything with the Rossini family is a calculated risk. They sat in silence, watching the river flow past. A jogger ran by, sweaty and happy. A family set up a picnic near the playground, life continuing, oblivious to the momentous decision being made on this ordinary park bench. I need to talk to the kids, Margaret finally said. They deserve to be part of this decision. Back at the hotel, they gathered in Margaret and David's room. Emma and Michael sat on the bed, their faces still showing the strain of the past few days. Margaret explained Marco's offer, leaving nothing out. So, let me get this straight, Michael said when she finished. The son of the mob boss Dad testified against wants Dad to help him go legit. And if Dad agrees, we get to go back to our normal lives. More or less, David confirmed. And if we say no? Emma asked quietly. We run. New identities, new city, new lives. Emma looked at her brother, then at their parents. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I think we should help him. Everyone stared at her. Hear me out, Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. Dad testified against Marco's father because it was the right thing to do, even though it destroyed his own life. Now, Marco's trying to build something better than what his father had. Isn't helping him the right thing to do too? It's also the safest option, Michael added pragmatically. If we run, he could find us again. But if we help him, we end this. We get to keep our lives here. I get to finish high school, Emma gets to finish college, we get to be normal again. There's nothing normal about working with a mob boss, David protested. There was nothing normal about testifying against one either, Emma shot back. But you did it because it was right. Maybe this is right too. Maybe breaking the cycle of revenge is the right thing, even if it's risky. Margaret looked at her daughter, her 19-year-old daughter, who was showing more wisdom than Margaret felt she had. Herself and felt a surge of pride mixed with sorrow. Emma shouldn't have to make these kinds of decisions, neither should Michael. But here they were, a family forged in lies, trying to navigate toward truth. Your father and I need to discuss this more, Margaret said. But I want you both to know whatever we decide, it will be as a family. No more secrets, no more lies. After the kids left, Margaret turned to David. What do you want to do? I don't know. He sat heavily on the couch. Part of me thinks this is insane. We shouldn't trust the Rossini family. But another part thinks Emma's right, maybe this is a chance to break the cycle. To turn something destructive into something constructive. And which part is louder? David was quiet for a long moment. The part that's terrified of losing you? The part that remembers being Thomas Marchetti and how lonely that was? The part that wants to keep being David Crawford, husband and father, for the rest of my life? Margaret sat beside him, not touching, but close. If we do this, there have to be rules. Complete transparency, I see every document, know every detail. A clear timeline for when your consultation with Marco ends. And the second anything feels wrong, the second there's any hint of illegal activity, we're out. Agreed. Agreed. And David? Margaret turned to face him. If we're going to stay married, if we're going to rebuild what you've broken, you can never lie to me again. About anything. I don't care how small, how protective, how well-intentioned, the truth always. Even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. Can you promise me that? David met her eyes and she saw tears forming. I promise. No more lies, no more secrets. Complete honesty, no matter what. Then we'll try. We'll help Marco. We'll end this threat. And we'll see if we can build something real from the wreckage of 20 years of lies. Do you think you can forgive me? David asked, his voice breaking. Eventually, Margaret considered this honestly. I don't know, maybe, but it will take time. And it will take you earning back my trust every single day. You destroyed something precious, David. 20 years of faith in you, in us. Rebuilding that won't happen overnight, but you're willing to try. I'm willing to try, not for you. For Emma and Michael, for the life we've built together. And maybe, if I'm being completely honest, because I still love who I thought you were, and I want to see if that person was ever real. David reached for her hand hesitantly. She let him take it, feeling the familiar calluses on his palm, the way their fingers fit together after 20 years of holding hands. He was real, David whispered. Thomas Marchetti was a scared kid running from the mob. David Crawford was a ghost pretending to be human. But the man who loves you, who loves our children, who built this life with you, he's the realest thing I've ever been. Margaret squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of 2 decades pressing down on them. Then, let's see if we can make him real enough to survive this. 3 months later, Margaret stood in the kitchen of their home in Harleston Village, the same kitchen where this nightmare had begun. But everything was different now. David was in his home office, on a video call with Marco Rossini's accounting team, reviewing quarterly reports for their restaurant chain. All legal, all legitimate, all transparent. Margaret had access to every file, every email, every document. True to his word, there were no more secrets. Emma was upstairs, packing for her return to College of Charleston for the fall semester. Michael was at football practice, preparing for his senior year. Normal life, resuming. Or as normal as it could be after everything they'd been through. The contract with Marco had been signed 6 weeks ago. David would consult on legitimizing Rossini business holdings for 2 years, after which the agreement would end and they'd go their separate ways. Marco had kept his word, so far no threats, no intimidation, just business. Janine had helped draw up the contract, making sure it was ironclad. Franklin checked in weekly, monitoring the situation. The whole thing still felt surreal, but it was working. Margaret's phone buzzed. A text from David, looking at the books. These restaurants are actually profitable. Marco's serious about going legitimate. She smiled slightly, texting back, good. Still don't trust him, but good. I don't trust him either, but I trust us. That was Nutha. Constant communication, the checking in, the sharing of everything. David had been true to his promise. No more lies, even small ones. He'd told her about his nightmares frequent, his fears constant, his guilt about dragging her into his past overwhelming. They'd started couples therapy. It was helping, slowly. The therapist had warned them it would take years to rebuild the trust David had destroyed. Margaret was prepared for that. Some days she looked at him and saw the stranger who'd lied for 20 years. Other days, she saw the man who'd made her coffee every morning and never missed their children's events and held her when she cried. Maybe both were true. Maybe he was both the liar and the man she loved. Maybe people were complicated enough to be both. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mom, can we talk?" "Of course, sweetie." Emma sat at the kitchen table, her expression serious. "I've been thinking about everything that happened. About Dad, about the lies, about how you decided to stay and try to make it work. Okay? I just wanted to say that I get it now. Why you stayed. Not because the lies didn't matter, but because sometimes love is bigger than the mistakes. And because walking away is easy. Staying and fighting for something that's hard, that's brave." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I have an excellent role model." Emma smiled. "You could have left. A lot of women would have, but you didn't. You chose to fight for us. For the family, that's pretty amazing, Mom. I'm not amazing. I'm just trying to figure out how to move forward. That's what makes you amazing." After Emma left, Margaret stood alone in her kitchen, looking out at the live oak with its Spanish moss swaying in the breeze. 20 years ago, she'd married a man she thought she knew. 20 years of building a life based on lies, but also 20 years of genuine moments, births and birthdays, first days of school and graduations, quiet Sunday mornings and chaotic holidays. Were those moments less real because David's name wasn't real? Was their love less valid because it started with deception? Margaret didn't know. Maybe she'd never know, but she knew this. She was choosing to stay. Not because she'd forgiven everything, not because the trust was rebuilt, but because walking away felt like letting the lies win. Like letting Marco Rossini's father win from beyond the grave. Like letting fear dictate her life the way it had dictated David's. She was choosing to stay and fight. For herself, for her children, for the possibility that something true could grow from the ashes of something false. David appeared in the doorway, his consultation finished for the day. "Hey, you okay?" "I'm okay," Margaret said. And, surprisingly, she meant it. Not happy, not healed, not whole, but okay. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I'm choosing to be here. And that feels powerful." David crossed to her carefully, always careful now about invading her space. "I love you, Maggie. I know I don't have the right to say that anymore, but it's true. I love you more than I can express. I know." Margaret looked up at him, and "I love you too. I'm angry and hurt and betrayed, and I also love you. People are complicated like that. Can we really get through this? I don't know, maybe. Ask me again in a year, or 5 years, or 20 years. Ask me every day for the rest of our lives, and maybe someday I'll have a definitive answer. That's fair." David smiled slightly. "Want to go for a walk? It's a beautiful evening." Margaret nodded. They walked out together, down the familiar streets of Harleston Village, past houses they'd admired for years, past neighbors they'd known for decades. David reached for her hand tentatively. She let him take it. They walked in silence, to people who'd spent 20 years together and were now learning to be together again for the first time. Learning what was real, what was salvageable, what could be rebuilt from ruins. The church bells began to toll 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening. The sun was setting over Charleston, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Beautiful and complicated, just like everything else. "Thank you," David said quietly, "for giving me another chance. For not running. For being braver than I've ever been." Margaret squeezed his hand. "Don't thank me yet. We have a long way to go. Years of work ahead of us, and I make no promises about where we'll end up. I know, but we're walking together. Right now, that's enough." And it was. Not perfect, not healed, not fixed. But together. Choosing each other despite the lies, despite the pain, despite everything. Because sometimes the only way to survive the truth is to walk through it side by side, holding hands, hoping that on the other side of honesty lies redemption. The Spanish moss swayed in the evening breeze. Charleston settled into its familiar rhythms, and two people who'd spent 20 years in the dark stepped together into the complicated, terrifying possibility of light.